Welcome to Love and Other Investments, where we talk about finances, but more importantly, how finances impact relationships. My name is John, and I'm a financial planner.
And my name is Jeff, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm Jeff.
I'm John.
And this is Love and Other Investments. I got it right.
You did. Good job.
Did I get a fist bump for that?
We've been kicking around the idea of having a conversation about kids, and because it's one of the things in relationships that people either argue about or don't know how to talk about, or creates maybe a fair amount of social, or not social, but a fair amount of relational angst.
Yeah, are you talking about whether to have kids, or are you talking about whether you can afford to have kids? Because those are different things.
Well, that's kind of where we're starting. So we're assuming that for our listeners' benefit today, that we're talking to quite a few of you who have talked about having kids in your relationship. Maybe you have 1, 2, and you're kind of discussing whether you should have more. But we're assuming that today's discussion is about more kids. Are they good? Are they bad?
Yes.
Can we afford them? Can we not?
No,
we can't?
Can't afford them.
Yeah, I think that's a fair thing to really start off with. Jeff, who never gives direct answers to any questions in his life, now says no, you cannot afford kids.
This is definitive.
Under any circumstances.
It's my professional
There's
opinion.
no sum of money to which you could afford kids.
No, of course there is.
But tell me about that.
You know, I think a lot of people, when they're thinking about having kids, are trying to figure out, like, how do you figure out what it costs to have a kid? And you can go online and look, you know, and you get all kinds of different numbers. And I'm sure people sometimes will come to you as a financial planner and say, you know, we're planning and we're thinking about having kids. You know, what do we need to have saved, or what are the expenses we should consider? And I'm sure you give them some thoughts, you know, about it. But the truth is that kids are expensive, and you can't really predict how that's going to play.
Yeah, can I chase a rabbit real quick?
Please.
So one of the things that's really fascinating right now with young couples who are coming in and talking about kids when it comes to finances is, it's one of the questions that I get thrown at so much is, hey, we want to set up a college savings account for our children.
Yeah. And
I'm fascinated by it because it's a social thing. What I'm saying is yes, it makes sense to prepare for future expenses. We would totally agree. I mean, I'm a planner, right?
Yeah.
But you have 1 million expenses that you're going to have in the future.
You're not planning for all of them, is that what you're saying?
Suddenly one of these has been elevated above others. I have people who are more interested in college savings accounts, for instance, than they are for a retirement account. Or they'll put college savings ahead of emergency reserve savings, or ahead of a lot of other things.
Sure.
I think it's fascinating to me that there are times where certain things get elevated socially. So keeping up with the Joneses, this is a really weird idea, but it happens. We've seen in our culture different times where it was considered virtuous for a wife to stay home and take care of the kids.
Sure.
And the best wives stayed home and took care of the kids.
Yeah.
And that's how people rated each other, was whether you stayed home and
You're
took care
talking
of
about
the kids.
1950s? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was a period of time where if you were a good person, you worked outside the home and took care of the kids. And then there was, you know, in society had shifted, right? Well, I'm proposing the idea that this is another one of those things that we've kind of all agreed, for whatever reason, quality marketing, I don't know, that everybody should be saving money for college education for their kids.
Do you think this is about fear? I mean, I'm legitimately asking, you know, when you have these conversations with people, are they coming in thinking, I can't afford college tuition, I better start saving now?
I don't want to guess what everybody's thinking.
Good.
See, you're rubbing off on me. Uh-huh. But I can tell you that some of the emotions are fear, but I can also say that one of the emotions that's really interesting is people believe that that's what it means to be successful.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
A successful parent is able to take their kid to the doctor. A successful parent is able to have their kids involved in sports. A successful parent is able to put money into a 529 plan for their kids.
Okay. Or take them to Disney World or Europe or what,
Or-
whatever the thing
yeah.
is. Yeah.
or whatever that
Have
is.
a car when they turn 16 or.
And you and I both might think that it's fascinating for people to say what they think it means to be successful parents.
Yeah.
Because I'm betting that we all have, in relationships, we have different ideas of what that would be.
Sure. You're talking about in a specific relationship.
Correct.
One partner might think it's one thing to be successful and the other partner might have a different idea altogether.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which gets us back to where we started this whole talk, which is, should we have kids or should we have more kids? And, one thing is I'm a planner, and so I think in planning terms. And one of the most basic planning ideas is you start at the end, you start at completion, and you work your way backwards. Right?
What's it look like to have a kid for the rest of your life?
Yeah. So, if I'm taking a trip to Dallas, what does success look like getting to Dallas? Okay, I get there on time for my event, and I have my car, and, I know where I'm going to stay. And so when does all that need to happen? Well, I probably need to book the flight 2 to 3 weeks out to get the best price. I need to rent the car to make sure that it's at the airport and not some crazy location. And I probably need to do that, on slightly after I buy my plane ticket, so I know when to reserve it for. So you kind of work from the finish
Yeah.
back to the beginning.
Right.
But I don't know too many couples who have said, what does it look like to successfully have raised children? And how are we gonna do that?
Yeah. Such a tough question to answer.
Mm-hmm.
What would it look like? How would we do it to achieve an end result in parenting? What is it that we want to accomplish? Really,
Yeah, and
that's a really tough one.
a basic question is what does it look like for us to have a successful family?
Yeah, right.
And I think that's kind of what we're getting at with this episode is opening up this great big can of worms of discussion. Because I think a lot of times, I was a young guy, fell in love, and, was very excited to get married. And I always figured I would be a dad at some point. Always figured we'd have kids. My, Pinterest board, if I can use it this way, my Pinterest board wasn't nearly filled out as much as hers was.
Sure.
As to what that was all going to look like.
Sure.
She came from a bigger family. I came from a smaller family. So that was kind of where negotiations, quote unquote, started. She came from 4, I came from 2. She's like, great, we'll compromise at 3. And I'm like, no, we'll compromise at 2. And
How many kids do you have, John?
we have 3. Yes, that's a whole another episode.
Another episode.
But I think we go into life, just assuming that we're going to do certain things. And that's fine. Those are fine reasons. But maybe engaging our big brain a little bit through the process and saying, why is it that we want to do this? What are the outcomes that we actually want, especially on something that is going to be so resource intensive?
For sure. Bigger than you can really imagine.
And I'm not just talking money.
Yeah. Time.
The amount of time, the lack of sleep.
The love that's involved, the patience.
The love, the frustration.
Oh my gosh.
The occasional disappointment, the interruptions, it's big. It's really big.
Really big.
You wouldn't just start a new company on a whim. And this is much bigger than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think, I tell people all the time, it's the hardest thing you would ever do to have kids in your life, and also the best thing. Mm-hmm. In my opinion. Mm-hmm. That's my experience.
Right.
It may not be for everyone.
But I think especially if you're, a young couple getting started, and you're going, one of you maybe wants kids more than the other one. That's a tough discussion. And it may be a discussion that unlocks a lot of other components that need to be talked about.
No doubt, and I suspect that when it's time to have a discussion like that, or when one person in the couple feels as if it's time to have it, it's probably they're feeling pressure already to be having kids right then. Mm-hmm. And this kind of discussion is probably one that doesn't occur in an hour or 10 hours or maybe 100 hours. Mm-hmm. this is the kind of discussion where you have to go deep and figure out why there's hesitation and what you're going to do with everything you learn about why there's hesitation. So, yeah, I mean, if I had the ability to talk to couples when they first get married, like after the wedding, it's probably one of the things I'd want to talk with them about, like, what are your thoughts about kids? And of course they may not want them right then, or they may change their mind in 5 years or whatever and then want them, or it doesn't matter. But being able to say, hey, let's talk about the kinds of questions, the kinds of concerns, the kinds of hesitations you have about thinking about building a family now, and start getting those conversations going now. You can begin to prepare for whatever that timeline looks like for them, rather than, last minute one person feeling absolutely compelled to have kids now and the other one being like, no, I want to put my foot on the brake there.
And I think there needs to be I think there's kind of a imperative to talk about it right now, because, we used to live in a society where we would have one primary wage earner in a family. It's not that we didn't have two working, but we kind of prioritized one of the careers over the other. And we are now no longer in that paradigm.
Right.
And both parties of the marriage now typically, over the last 15 years or so, are viewed much more as equals in how they participate in providing for the couple or for the family.
For financial providing, right.
Correct. Even if one has a bigger salary than the other, it is not normal that we would say, well, that's the important one.
Yeah, I mean, they're both probably needed.
They're both needed.
Yeah.
So the discussion of kids is now, in some ways, a lot more challenging, because not only are kids expensive, but daycare is expensive.
That's right. And because we're more mobile as a society, we don't necessarily live near our family, who might be willing or able to help us with little kids when we need to go to work. So it's a challenge especially I'm sure for families where their income would be less than one person's income would be less than the cost of childcare would be. Then it's a really tough dilemma. Like, how do you think about that? You need the income to survive, but you're going to be spending more than that on the childcare. I mean, it's tough to give up a career.
Yeah. So, we're right back to where we typically end up, which is these are things that have to be talked about, and I think talked about more openly than I think what most couples are used to having discussions about.
Sure.
And, I always love the conversation for a couple to have. What type of family do we want? What kind of relationship do we want in 20 years? That is not an unrealistic thing to have a discussion about.
Yes, it might be difficult to know how it will unfold because we can't predict the future. But being able to have a discussion like, yeah, we would like our family to look like this, seems like a really important idea.
Yeah, I mean, even if you don't have a lot of the details, you at least have the beginning of an image.
Yeah.
The beginning of a sketch of where you're going.
Right.
And once you have that, here comes the planner, you can start working backwards and saying, well, what would need to happen in 10 years?
Right.
Where it would need to happen 5 years from now? What would need to happen this next year? What would it look like to make progress tomorrow towards that idea?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it goes. But I think it all has to start with an open and honest discussion about, where you come from and what it is that you want and why you want that, and doing that honestly and openly with your partner.
Yeah, totally agree. Hey, thanks for listening. Please leave us a review and follow us so you don't miss an episode. If you'd like to learn more about us, please visit relational-media.com.